So, it is September 1986, and I am 23. And I'm at a TV station in Chicago waiting to be interviewed for the 10 o'clock news. The producer hands me some wire copy that says that my father has been formally charged by the Russians as a spy. What had happened was 10 days earlier, my father, Miranda Daniloff, who was the bureau chief, the Moscow bureau chief for US News and World Report, goes out to meet a friend who hands him a package. A white van pulls up, KGB thugs jump out, they handcuff him, they throw him in the back, and they send him speed off to prison. The Americans had arrested a Soviet spy in the New York subway, caught red-handed, and the Russians wanted a hostage to get their guy back. The producer hands me a glass of water because I have to sit down, because the wire copy also says that the penalty for espionage in the Soviet Union is 30 years hard labor or death. I'm a recent theater major living in Chicago. I'm doing the audition circuit. I have an agent, some super snazzy headshots, and a waitress job at a jazz club that closes at 4 a.m. I had just gone to go visit my parents in Moscow, and I was on my way back home through Paris when I learned of my father's arrest. There were about 15 messages for me at the hotel. I try to call my mother, but of course the KGB has jammed the phone lines. The following day, I think to myself, okay, I've got to get myself to the American embassy to figure out what to do next. But it's Labor Day, it's a holiday, and it's closed. And I remember this sinking, panicky feeling as I'm banging on the door, trying to get a duty officer through the intercom, and when I finally do, nobody knows a thing. Finally, I get a message to fly to London to meet up with my 16-year-old brother, whom my mother was sending on an airplane out of Moscow. And when I get there, we meet up in Heathrow Airport, the magazine's publisher greets us with a whole bunch of reporters trailing behind him. The next thing I know, I've got microphones shoved in my face, and all of a sudden we're doing an impromptu press conference at the baggage claim. This is still the Cold War. And the strategy here was to try to get as much media attention as we possibly could to force some kind of resolution. So my uncle gets us booked on the BBC TV. It's a live interview in front of hundreds of millions of people around the globe. I remember hearing the interview question, and my heart is pounding and my mouth is dry, and I'm thinking, you better not say the wrong thing, or they're going to be sending your father off to the gulag. Even though this was still the Cold War, and there was no Twitter, no Instagram, no social media, this thing just took off like wildfire. It just took off. There were restaurants across the country that started boycotting Russian vodka. The US-Soviet summit between President Reagan and President Gorbachev canceled. News helicopters landed on the football field of my brother's high school. This was my dad. I mean, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders when I was little, who used to pretend to be the Chiquita banana lady so I would laugh. And now, all of a sudden, he's caught up in some John le Carré-like spy novel, only this isn't fiction. I don't have time to think or feel or breathe. When I get back to Chicago, my roommate has filled up reams of yellow pads with interview requests from Good Morning America, from reporters wanting interviews, from the Today Show. I get flown out to New York and Boston for news appearances. I walk past a newspaper box and I see a front page of the newspaper with a woman that looks vaguely familiar, and it's me. And then there are these other requests. A football player from the Chicago Bears wants a date. Fashion photographers promise me free photo sessions and modeling contracts. There's some crazy person in Chicago who is cutting up the coupons from the Sunday paper and mailing them to me. And then I've got a peeping Tom at my back window. I mean, I don't get it. People see you on TV and they think that they can just do these kinds of things. So I'd go to my waitress job, I'd pull my hair back into a ponytail and wear garish blue eyeshadow and hope that nobody would recognize me. Finally, after about a month of this, the US and Russia strike a deal. I had just moved into a new apartment, and my landlord was upgrading the kitchen appliances. The phone starts ringing at 6 a.m., and it's CBS Evening News. The producer says, "Your father is being released today, and Dan Rather wants you to come into the studio for an interview." And I say, "Well, I'd love to, but I can't. I'm waiting for my stove." Finally, I get confirmation that he's on a flight to Berlin and then on to Washington, D.C. The producer calls back, "Now we're sending a car and an intern to wait for your stove." I fly to Washington, D.C. to meet up with my mother, my father, and my brother. We have 10 minutes in a holding room at Dulles Airport for tears and hugs and, oh my God, the relief. And then my father goes off to talk to 150 reporters. My mother and I spend the next few days answering phone calls, making appointments. The wife of a friend of ours comes to take me clothes shopping for our visit to the White House. She picks out red shoes and a red belt, things that I would never have picked for myself. Then a car takes us to the White House, and we're greeted very warmly at the Oval Office by President Reagan, who's very, very tall, and Nancy Reagan, who's really tiny, and she has a huge head. My father and the president sit in those chairs in front of the fireplace, have a little chat. Photographers are taking photographs, lots of photographs, then more photographs out on the Rose Garden steps. When I finally get back to Chicago, life begins to revert to something that somewhat resembles normal. I do a very, very small acting role for a TV drama with Shelley Hack, who was one of the Charlie's Angels in that hit show, Charlie's Angels. And we're out by the Chicago River outside, and some bystander comes up and says, "Oh my God, oh my God." Of course, I move aside for Shelley Hack. "You're the Daniloff daughter," and she points at me. After a number of years, I begin to think that the only way to have any kind of agency in a theater career, to be able to pay your bills or to actually have any control over what you do, is to be famous. And I'd had a taste of that, and I didn't love it. So I do one last audition at the Steppenwolf Theater for a role that I don't get, and I decide that I am done. I mean, who wants to live one's life in make-believe anyway? Of course, at the time, I didn't realize what else I was going to be giving up. So I move into radio journalism, covering real life, move to Boston, get married, acquire stepchildren, have a baby, and become a Runkle School parent. One summer evening, I'm sitting at a bar on Cape Cod with my husband, who's made friends with a retired attorney. He's involved in the local theater scene. "Oh, really?" I say. "Well, I did theater in Chicago 30 years ago. He asks me if I'd audition for the play that he's doing that spring. He asks for 7 months, and I keep saying, no, long time ago, far away. He keeps asking. I keep saying no. One night he comes in and slaps a script down on the bar and says, just read the damn play. So I do. The play is called A Pack of Lies, and it's set in the Cold War, and it's about two couples who are friends. Only one of the couples is spying for the Russians. Right? I mean, of all of the plays. So I audition. And I think I also sort of wanted to know whether I could still do it. And I get the part of the woman, not the spy woman, but the woman who's betrayed. And oh my God, I was so happy to work with these actors. They were so talented. And you could feel every night the audience just breathing with you. And the process of creating that character and bringing her story to life was so deliciously familiar. And something in me begins to stir. It wasn't that I thought that I was going to step back into a theater career. No, that's not what it was. What it was reaching back into my own creativity, that creative voice, that voice that I had put away, that, like I had almost wrapped it up in tissue paper and put it into a box for safekeeping. Because at the age of 23, I didn't know how to tell the difference between the creative voice and the voice that got swept up in international politics. And I certainly didn't know what to do with that fear that I might say the wrong thing in a situation that had life or death consequences. So if I could tell my 23-year-old self something, this is what I would say. Theater, the arts, music, painting, yeah, it's all make-believe. But it's also the art of telling the truth, emotional truths, of the things that connect us, the things that bind us and divide us, but mostly about what makes all of us human. And there's incredible value to that. Sometimes I think that life has this funny way of making you come full circle so that you can look at life again from a completely different perspective. And sometimes, if you're brave enough, you can pick up where you began.